Around 2022, I started doing a deep dive into Wisconsin folklore. Specifically, I was looking to piece together a list of every single legendary creature in Wisconsin folklore, with the name and description of each type of legendary creature. The number of creatures that I have amassed digging through different books, websites, and Federal Writers Project notes has grown to such a size that I now am in the process of editing this list into a book, a complete bestiary of Wisconsin lore, if you will. The thing that stood out to me during this project is one salient truth. Wisconsin has a lot of gnome legends, by which I mean legends of little magical men. About 13% of my notes on Wisconsin legends are just taken up by the gnome lore. There are a grand total of 42 gnome varieties within Wisconsin lore. These include the gnomes of Wisconsin's indigenous groups, gnomes that were brought here through the migration of outside cultures, gnome legends that were created by later Wisconsinites, and even a few gnome legends from lumberjack stories. Through this little project of mine, I have unironically become the world expert on Wisconsin gnome legends. Some of these gnome legends can be found online. Some can only be found in increasingly obscure books. Some could be found dredging up old folklore pamphlets from the early 20th century. One of these gnome legends could only be found within the unsorted notes of the Federal Writers Project, which sought to catalog Wisconsin folklore during the Great Depression. And so that none can doubt the authenticity of my knowledge on gnome lore, I have even published a little website, which includes sources, quotations, and citations for the many gnome legends I have uncovered. This video will serve as a teaser of sorts to my overall book on Wisconsin's legendary creatures, detailing the gnome types that I have found within our lore. Despite these legends coming from different cultures, many of these gnome types share various features with one another. They are almost universally portrayed as tricksters. Many times they are explicitly said to be invisible, except to children and medicine men. Many are said to live in the wilderness, especially near rivers, though Wisconsin also has a handful of gnomes that instead dwell in human households, underground, or alongside roads. We even have a few alien gnomes, believed to come from other planets or dimensions. Many of these gnomes are known to throw rocks. A few are known to be able to lay curses on humans. Many gnomes are said to appreciate offerings, either of tobacco, food, or shiny rocks. Some are craftsmen, some are miners. Some are dedicated to fighting against evil, while others fight against pollution. Some guard treasures. Some bless and protect children. Some are known for knocking on doors. To start off this list of gnomes, it seems only fitting to begin with Wisconsin's first gnome legends. There are a total of 3 cultures that are truly indigenous to the state of Wisconsin, which were here before anyone else. These are the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, and the Dakota Sioux. Though the Dakota Sioux were forced out of the state by the Ojibwe in the 17th century and no longer have a major presence in the state. Among Wisconsin's original inhabitants, there was a grand total of 5 different gnome types between them. To start out our list, the Héroka were the magical little people of the Ho-Chunk, believed to dwell near the Wisconsin River. The Héroka are associated with hunting and archery, and so their pictographic symbol is the bow and arrow, and another name for them is the Momoni, or bow walkers. A Héroka never misses his shot with his bow, and his arrow is always lethal. The secret to their accuracy and lethality lies in the special Héroka breathings, which make a sound like ah-ha-hey, ah-ha-hey. A Héroka simply needs to draw their bow back, perform the breathings, and upon releasing their arrow, their target will instantly die. An arrow empowered by the Héroka breathings is capable of even felling a tree in a single shot. The Héroka can also bless humans with this miraculous accuracy, either by supplying them with an arrow or by teaching them the Héroka breathings. Ho-Chunk men blessed in this way formed the Society of Those Who Have Been Blessed by the Héroka, which hosted feasts and ceremonies among its members. In addition to their powers of archery, the Héroka could shapeshift and could walk on water and even through the air. They also possess the unique ability among Ho-Chunk spirits in being able to marry their own nieces. The Héroka are also known to intermarry with the Forked Men, another type of spirit related to archery. The name Héroka means hornless, and they are named after their chief, Héroka, the Ho-Chunk culture hero. This Héroka was once known as Red Horn and One Horn, named after his horn of red-colored hair. Red Horn was also known by the name Redman, since his entire body was red in color. He was also known to the spirit world as he who wears human heads as earrings, since 2 tiny heads hung from each of his ears, which would make silly faces at passers-by. These heads would seem to be Wok-panigra, a type of Ho-Chunk spirit that took the form of tiny human heads. As a child, Redhorn was known as he who gets hit with deer lungs, because his older brother would throw deer lungs at him. Redhorn adventured alongside 2 companions, Turtle, an animal spirit and storms as he walks, a thunderbird. Redhorn became known as Héroka, or Hornless, when he sacrificed his horn of hair to light the ocean on fire in order to save humanity from man-eating giants. The Héroka chief had 2 sons. The eldest was also named Héroka, and also wore tiny heads as earrings. The youngest son instead wore tiny heads attached to his nipples, and was the chief of the Xonunįgᵋra, or little children spirits, a type of little men the size of small children. These little children spirits were said to have all the same powers as the Héroka. For this reason, while these little children spirits could potentially be understood as another separate type of gnome or magical little people, it perhaps would be easier to understand them as a clan, moiety, or family within the greater species of Ho-Chunk little people. The Héroka and Xonunįgᵋra have notable parallels with both the Pawisa'sûk and the Bagwajiwinini, which are both types of little people who are said to be supernaturally gifted when it comes to archery. This comparison is stronger with the Pawisa'sûk, whose archery, like that of the Héroka, is supernaturally powerful and abnormally destructive. In the later folklore of Wisconsin, the Héroka chief Redhorn is said to also be in command of an army of Ho-Chunk and Viking ghosts, the remnants of a long-forgotten battle between Norse explorers and Ho-Chunk warriors. The third gnome on our list is the Memegwesiwuk. The Memegwesiwuk are part of the beliefs of the indigenous Menominee, as well as a part of the beliefs of the Ojibwe who would later come to the state. They are described as being very ugly and the size of small children, but with large heads, hairy faces and bodies, and a strange voice that sounds like the whine of a dragonfly. According to the Menominee version of the legend, the Memegwesiwuk also do not have noses. Some Ojibwe stories differ from the description of the Memegwesiwuk as hairy and ugly. Instead, these stories present the Memegwesiwuk as simply resembling small children. These stories claim that the other accounts of the Memegwesiwuk, where they are portrayed as hairy and ugly, were merely confusing the Memegwesiwuk with the Mizauwabeekummoowuk, another type of Manitoussiwuk or little spirit. The Memegwesiwuk dwell along the banks of rivers, where they mark their presence by carving symbols onto the rocks, similar to another type of little people, the Makia'wisag. They are also capable of traversing the rivers, either using logs as canoes or else carving canoes from stone. They are also invisible, except to children and medicine men. Memegwesiwuk are generally benign and will help people in exchange for offerings of tobacco, food, or small articles of clothing. If a Memegwesi is disrespected, they will turn mischievous, often stealing things or blowing away canoes to get back at those who have wronged them. Among the Ojibwe, the Memegwesiwuk were the best beloved of the little spirits, specifically because they cared for and protected children. The Memegwesiwuk would guide lost children back to home, or would comfort sad and despondent children, giving them strong parallels to the Elves of New Glarus. Occasionally, a deceased parent would even return to life as a Memegwesi in order to provide supernatural care for their surviving child. The fourth type of gnome found in Wisconsin lore is known as the Iktómi. The Iktómi are a strange piece of Dakota folklore, given that the term Iktómi, meaning spider, is also the given name of a prominent spider spirit and trickster figure found in Dakota stories. Yet Iktómi is also said to be the name of a species of spider dwarves associated with Flint and flint craft. Further confusing the matter is the fact that the trickster Iktómi is associated with a different type of little people found in Dakota folklore, the Čanoti. So the little people known as the Iktómi are not to be confused with the trickster Iktómi, and further are not to be confused with the little people of the trickster Iktómi. The Iktómi were a type of little people who took the form of spiders when not hard at work crafting flint arrowheads, which they shared freely with the Dakota. They had underground workshops, found inside hollow rocks, where they continuously worked chipping away at flint in order to fashion arrowheads. They could sometimes be seen running through the grass and brush, and the constant rapping of their hammers could sometimes be heard at night. In their spider forms, they wove webs in grasses and bushes in order to mark pathways and locations for one another. Of Wisconsin's other types of legendary little people, the Iktómi are most comparable to the Tommyknockers, who also dwell underground and can be detected by the tapping sounds they make on rock. They can also be compared to the Héroka and the Pawisa'sûk, both of which have been known to provide weapons for humans. The Iktómi can also be compared to flint, a ho-chunk mineral spirit known for making many powerful magical weapons out of flint. Next, we will discuss the magical little people created by the trickster figure Iktómi. The Čanoti are a type of magical little people from the legends of the Dakota Sioux. They are referred to as either the Čanoti, meaning tree dweller, or the Čanotila, meaning little tree dweller. English translations sometimes refer to them as elves or wood elves. Čanoti are portrayed as small and thin, with greenish skin and wild, unkempt hair, who dwell within the trees of the forest. They were mischievous and delighted in luring people into the gloomy woods to bewilder them. Čanoti also served a role as the messengers of the spirit world and would often impart these messages through dreams. It is said the Čanoti were originally raccoons. The trickster figure and spider spirit Iktómi struck a deal with the raccoon species, agreeing not to victimize their kind with his trickery in exchange for 2 of their infants. Iktómi attempted to turn these 2 infant raccoons into humans, but because of their original form, even as adults, they never grew larger than the size of a raccoon. Because of their connection with Iktómi, the Čanoti were also just as cunning as the trickster himself. The Čanoti can be compared with other Native American spirits that serve as dream messengers, such as the Wakachuna, the Mesingu, and the Butte des Morts skeleton warriors. Of those 3, the Wakakuna from Ho-Chunk folklore are the spirits with the most in common with the Čanoti, as they are also tree-dwelling wood spirits, albeit ones with a more feline form. The Čanoti can also be compared to other raccoon spirits throughout the legends of various Native American tribes, such as the Ho-Chunk meteor spirit, Wojijaga. They also have similarities to the Wematigunis, the Answerbacks, and the Fleshgates, which are all said to use their voices and mimicry abilities to deceive and confuse forest travelers. The next 20 gnome types were all brought into the state through immigration. As a result, we will cover them in the order in which their culture arrived in Wisconsin, for the most part at least, since pinning down which culture brought the Armouchiquois to Wisconsin is actually quite difficult. To be clear, this section covers gnome types that have specifically been recorded in Wisconsin folklore. There are many cultures that have come to the state that did not appear to bring the gnome legends of their homeland with them, or at least their legends were unrecorded. However, for these next 20 gnome types, we have specific legends recorded within state folklore. Interestingly enough, since folklore is an ever-evolving thing, sometimes these immigrant gnomes are radically different from their counterparts back in the old country. When the Potawatomi came to Wisconsin, they brought with them stories of the Pawisa'sûk, also called the Pais, or Little Ones. The Pawisa'sûk were said to be 2 feet tall and mischievous, but overall benign. The Pawisa'sûk also had formidable and dangerous magical powers that they could use against humans if they were provoked and needed to defend themselves. The greatest of the Pawisa'sûk's magical abilities was their supernatural skill in hunting and fishing. Like the Héroka and the Bagwajiwininis, The Pawisa'sûk were extremely skilled with both bow and arrow, possessing a supernatural talent for archery. Uniquely, though, the Pawisa'sûk were also skilled with a musket. They were capable of firing a gun in such a way that the musket ball would ricochet and slay a large number of targets, and could even load their muskets with nails and use them to pin full-grown bucks to the trees. In one legend, a single shot fired by a Pawisa passed through a fish that was leaping out of the water, then ricocheted in such a manner as to pass through an entire flock of ducks before passing through a hollow tree, revealing a hive of honeybees, passing through a buck, and then finally slaying a large rabbit, the Pawisa hunter harvesting all of that game with a single shot. The Pawisa'sûk claimed that they gained their supernatural abilities directly from the Great Spirit, though others speculated that they received their power from the evil underwater panthers and horned serpents. They were also capable of turning invisible, bringing luck to the wigwams that they dwelled near, could heal even lethal wounds, and could warp and alter the appearances of humans, sometimes to horrifying effect. They had an affinity for owls, and were capable of summoning the nocturnal birds. They were even able to use their healing and body manipulation powers to take an eye from an owl and transplant it into the eye socket of a human. They also possessed or could create a large variety of magical items. They could improve a Thunderbird's war club, adding a spike to the club that allowed it to break through anything. They could also create a wax arrow that allowed an archer to teleport to wherever they shot. Despite the Pawisa'sûk possibly gaining their powers from horned serpents and underwater panthers, the adversaries of the Thunderbirds, they also were able to obtain Thunderbird feathers. They also possessed a magical leather thong that could be turned into snakes, as well as a magical stone that, if thrown into the air, would land on an enemy and strike them instantly dead. These last two items the Pawisa'sûk received from the grandmother of the trickster hero Wisaka. Two Pawisa brothers in specific had a rather antagonistic relationship with Wisaka, who coveted their hunting prowess. Wisaka made the claim to the Pawisa'sûk that he was, in fact, the Great Spirit. The little men did not believe this claim, but Wisaka persisted, promising to give them real power in exchange for some venison ribs, though in reality, this was merely a ploy to try to capture the Pawisa'sûk to exploit their hunting ability. The Pawisa'sûk saw through Wisaka's trickery, saying, "What power can you possibly give us that we haven't got?" but agreed to cook some venison ribs for Wisaka anyways. They allowed themselves to be captured, though it soon became obvious that they could escape any time they chose. While captured by Wisaka and his grandmother, Wisaka treated the Pawisa'sûk with cruelty, whereas his grandmother treated them kindly. As a result, the Pawisa'sûk stuck around mostly just to repeatedly play extreme pranks on Wisaka, tricking, harming, and almost killing him on numerous occasions before they finally decided to leave for good. When the Ojibwe came to Wisconsin in the 17th century, they brought with them legends of no less than 4 different types of Manitoussiwuk, or little spirits, spirit beings which took the form of little men. One of these, the Memegwesiwuk, is shared with the Menominee, while the other 3 will be covered next. Complicating things slightly, many Ojibwe stories simply refer to the Manitoussiwuk in general, without specifying which of the 4 types of little spirits is being referred to by the legend. As a result, there are many stories of the Manitoussiwuk where it is uncertain which of the 4 types of little spirits the story is referring to. Some legends say there are both good Manitoussiwuk and evil Manitoussiwuk. The primary way one can tell the difference is in regards to how they treat children. Evil Manitoussiwuk will attempt to steal children, but the good Manitoussiwuk protect children from such attempts. The good Manitoussiwuk are also known to fight against evil spirits and are in league with the Thunderbirds. In one Ojibwe story, a group of Manitoussiwuk fought against a Wendigo with the help of a Thunderbird. The Manitoussiwuk fought by throwing rocks, which were then magically transformed into lightning bolts that struck the Wendigo. Marble Point on the shores of Lake Superior is said to be a sacred place for little people as well, though the specific type of little people found at this location is uncertain. It is said that no one may cut a tree, or kill an animal at Marble Point without incurring the displeasure of the little people. They are also said to be the source of concretions, strange round lumps of hardened clay found on the southern shore of Lake Superior, especially around the Marble Point area. These concretions are known as grandfather stones and are believed to have their own souls as well. The little people create these grandfather stones during thunderstorms and leave them upon the beach as evidence of their existence. One prominent little spirit in Ojibwe folklore was Chikawbewis, his name meaning poked in the eye. Chikawbewis was a trickster, a masterful archer, and a skilled hunter, and would regularly defeat giants in competitions within his legends. It is uncertain which specific type of Manitoussiwuk Chikawbewis belonged to. He may have also been his own, unique type of little spirit, or perhaps he was even merely a human with dwarfism. This uncertainty is even a feature of the legend. One story goes so far as to feature a group of giantesses arguing over whether Chikawbewis was a Memegwesiwuk, Pau-eehnssiwuk, or a Mizauwabeekummoowuk. The first specific type of Manitoussiwuk we will discuss are the Bagwajiwininis. The Bagwajiwininis, or Pukwudgies, are a type of magical little wild men who dwell in the forests. Stories of them first entered Wisconsin upon the arrival of the Ojibwe in the 17th century, and again with the Mohicans of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band in the 19th. Their name literally translates to wild men, and they are also sometimes called Apa'eehns or Pau-eehnssiwuk, simply meaning little people. A Bagwajiwinini stands about knee-high in height and is said to have the ability to turn invisible, confuse humans, and transform into dangerous animals. In Ojibwe stories, the Bagwajiwininis are portrayed as generally benevolent but mischievous, and are considered master of the bow and the canoe. In Mohican stories, they may help people who treat them kindly, but they are also capable of being capricious and dangerous. The Bagwajiwinini is most similar to the Héroka of Ho-Chunk folklore and the Pawisa'sûk of Potawatomi folklore, which are both little people skilled in archery like the Bagwajiwinini. They also bear similarities to the Memegwesiwuk, which are also known for skillful canoeing. The Bagwajiwinini also draws some parallels with both Sasquatch and the Beast of Bray Road, which are both thought to have inspired wild man legends. The next type of Manitoussiwuk we will discuss are the Mizauwabeekummoowuk. The Mizauwabeekummoowuk, or Zauwabeekummoowuk, are copper spirits who dwell in mountain cliffsides. They are described as being tiny, shaggy, hairy, and unkempt men. They were also simultaneously said to have an appearance like that of the gold, pyrite, and copper found embedded in the mountain escarpments where they made their homes, and were said to be associated with those precious metals. The Mizauwabeekummoowuk mostly kept to themselves in their mountain homes, but from time to time would descend from on high in order to cut down overbearing humans or evil spirits. According to Ojibwe stories, they were frequently confused with the Memegwesiwuk, which were sometimes also said to be very hairy. Their association with the mineral riches of the mountains gives them parallels with the mountain-dwelling gnomes of Czechoslovakian immigrant legends. They can also be compared to other spirits who guard over copper deposits, such as the underwater panther and the Ho-Chunk copper spirits. The final type of Manitoussiwuk I have to try to pronounce is the Pau-eehnssiwuk. The Pau-eehnssiwuk were a group of little spirits who dwelled in the forests and meadows that were alongside the rivers. They served to combat the treachery of the Nibianabe, siren-like mermen who would try to lure humans underwater in order to abduct and marry them. The Pau-eehnssiwuk primarily interfered with the Nibianabe's schemes by emerging at night and warning humans away from the dangers of the mermen, helping humans to avoid Nibianabe traps. The folkloric role of the Pau-eehnnssiwuk in warning humans away from supernatural river dangers is rather unique within Wisconsin lore. The only comparable folkloric practice would be the roadside Kaplitzki shrines built by Polish immigrants. These shrines were sometimes placed near rivers and lakes, meant to ward against the boginki, water-dwelling creatures which would abduct unbaptized children in a manner reminiscent of how the Anishinaabe abducted unmarried men. The 10th gnome type on our list are the Lutins. The Lutins came into Wisconsin lore along with the French of Green Bay, originating within the folklore of continental France. In appearance, the Lutin is quite similar to a garden gnome, 1.5 feet in height with long beards. They wear the pointed red hats stereotypical to gnomes, albeit with 2 feathers stuck in their caps, and are able to use their magical hats to become invisible. The Lutins dearly care for horses, and so are typically found around stables. They are known for tying fairy knots in the manes of horses, and will sometimes sneak into stables by night to ride the horses, causing the horse to be exhausted and excitable the following morning. The Lutins also detested salt, and would not cross a line of salt on the ground. The Lutin evolved as it came to North America, with the Lutins of French-Canadian and French-Wisconsinite folklore gaining additional abilities and qualities that were not found in the continental French stories. North American Lutins can also control the weather and take the form of small animals, such as dogs, rabbits, and cats, especially preferring to take the form of pure white cats. The American Lutin also served as a house sprite and could either be of a helpful or harmful disposition. They either aided the homeowner of the home they are attached to by performing chores around the house and stable, or pulled pranks and caused small inconveniences. The folklore of French Wisconsinites further added to the Lutins' description, reporting that Lutins possess only one eye, taking the appearance of tiny cyclopean gnomes. These one-eyed Lutins appear unique to Wisconsin, as this detail is absent in both continental French and French-Canadian versions of the creature. The Lutins can be compared to the Blaumaner, another type of fey folk found within Wisconsin lore. Like the Lutins, the Blaumaner are known to sneak into barns in order to interact with the animals. However, while the Lutin favors horses, the Blauman favors cattle. They can also be compared with the Humpdumple, which is the other one-eyed gnome of Wisconsin folklore. They further share an odd contrast with the Tomte Nisser, a type of little people who are sometimes portrayed as one-eyed in Scandinavian legend, but which are always portrayed as two-eyed in Wisconsin folklore, making them somewhat of a reversal in how the Lutin evolved. The 11th type of gnomes on our list are the Tommyknockers. Knockers have their origin in Cornish folklore, as little people who aided Cornish tin miners. They were sometimes said to be the spirits of deceased miners, in some cases said to be the ghosts of Jewish miners in specific. Their legends spread with Cornish miners to the Americas, where they became known as Tommyknockers and became a part of the folklore of Cornish American mining culture. In Wisconsin, this manifested as a part of the lead mining culture of the state. Tommyknockers were seen as so essential to a safe and successful mining operation that Cornish miners reportedly refused to enter new mines unless assured that the Tommyknockers were already on duty within the tunnels. Eventually, stories of the Tommyknockers would spread even to the non-Cornish lead miners. The Tommyknockers appeared as tiny, ugly, wrinkled men with long white whiskers. They wore tinier versions of the standard miner's attire. Tommyknockers could either be helpful or harmful. If a miner had a helpful Tommyknocker, the knocker could lead the miner to rich veins of lead. Helpful Tommyknockers would also warn miners of impending cave-ins, signaling danger whenever they made more than 3 knocking sounds at one time, thereby warning the humans in the mine to evacuate. An angry Tommyknocker might steal hats or tools, cause lead veins to dry up, pelt miners with stones, and blow out candles. In extreme circumstances, they might even tamper with dynamite fuses or cause cave-ins. A miner could gain the favor of the Tommyknockers by leaving the leftover crusts of his pasty pie in the mines as an offering to the knockers, or by leaving clay statuettes of the Tommyknocker at the entrance to the mine. The Tommyknocker can be compared with many different legendary creatures of Wisconsin which guarded valuable mineral deposits, such as the Mizauwabeekummoowuk, the mining gnomes, the underwater panther, and the iron and copper spirits. Of these, they are most similar to the mining gnomes, which were also known to guide humans to mineral riches if they were of a friendly disposition. The Tommyknockers can also be compared to the Iktómi, another type of subterranean little people, which could be detected by tapping or knocking noises. They can also be compared to Badger Bill, a legendary giant and lead miner, the only other legendary creature from Wisconsin to be associated with lead mining in specific. Our 12th group of gnomes are the Makia'wisag. The Makia'wisag are the little people of the Brothertown Indian Nation, standing at about 2 feet tall. They are capable of making themselves or others invisible and are said to carve strange symbols onto rocks. They are associated with whippoorwill birds, from which their name is derived. Like many types of Wisconsin gnomes, the Makia'wisag are benevolent and helpful towards those who give them offerings of gifts. But unlike the other varieties, the Makia'wisag directly solicit their offerings. They travel door to door and request gifts, especially offerings of food, from the people living there. The Makia'wisag will be friendly and helpful towards those who comply and give them their requested gifts. However, if one refuses to give an offering to the Makia'wisag, the little person will point at them, magically turning the person invisible and paralyzing them. Once the homeowner has been cursed in this way, the Makia'wisag will rob the person's house of whatever it desires, often taking more than they had originally requested as a gift. The Makia'wisag have a number of small similarities with the other little people of Wisconsin lore. Like the Wauwatosa night visitors, they appear suddenly outside of a home, knocking on the door. Like the Wematigunis, they demand an offering from a human and punish the human if they are refused. Like the house troll, they are known to burglarize people's homes. Finally, like the Memegwesiwuk, they are known to carve strange symbols on rocks. The 13th group of gnomes are known as the Tehotikal luhe. The Tehotikal luhe were a type of little people standing 2 feet tall, whose stories came into Wisconsin with the arrival of the Oneida. They are capable of becoming invisible, but may show themselves to children, elders, or medicine men. Their name means drum dancers, since due to their invisibility, they can only be detected through the sound of their drums. Towards those who disrespect them or who disrespect nature, they are mischievous, often playing pranks. They may even be dangerous depending on how severe the disrespect has been. If offered tobacco, they may do favors for people and will aid farmers with their crops. They are considered the grandchildren of Hinun, the chief of the Thunders. Some Tehotikal luhe are known as stone rollers and are incredibly strong, responsible for moving large rocks and boulders around. This served to explain the presence of glacial erratics, boulders that were moved by the glaciers during the Ice Age. Some Iroquoian groups considered the Tehotikal luhe to be related to the Ohdoh, a type of subterranean little people that entered Wisconsin through the legends of the Stockbridge Munsee. They also bear some similarities to another Stockbridge Munsee little people, the Nagumwasug, which likewise help humans with agriculture. Speaking of the Ohdoh are one of 2 groups of little people who are said to be the guardians of the Stockbridge Munsee community, along with the Nagumwasug. While the Nagumwasug battled the evil creatures of the water and air, the Ohdoh battled evil creatures of the earth and underground. It was said that the Ohdoh were not always spirits and were once human. However, during the Ice Age, when glaciers covered the lands, the Ohdoh moved beneath the earth and became subterranean spirits, taking the form of little men. The Ohdoh live underground to this day, emerging from the underground only during the night in order to dance or to hunt evil monsters. The chief of the Ohdoh is named Nasahegon and may choose to show himself to a human if they give the proper offerings at the Stockbridge Munsee Reservation. A person is required to give a burnt offering of tobacco at Lower Red Lake, offer burnt sage at the Old Gresham Mission, and offer burnt cedar at the northern branch of the Embarrass River. After making these offerings, A human must sit and fast until Nasaguhan, should he decide to show himself, appears. When the Ohdoh first went underground, they encountered evil creatures, and thereafter began a never-ending war against evil. They primarily fight these creatures to ensure the continued safety of the Stockbridge Munsi. Their three main enemies are said to be the Chenu, the Akari, and the Baicoks. In this protective role, they can be compared to European American legends of guardian angels and the spirit rock of Menominee tradition, which is said to guarantee the protection of the Menominee people until it one day crumbles away. Like the Ohdoh, the Nagumwasug are the other group of little people said to protect the Stockbridge Munsi community from supernatural threats. The Nagumwasug are said to be hideously ugly, hatchet-faced, with beady eyes, and are thought to dwell just outside of human settlements. They are said to be 2 feet tall, but weigh just under 2 pounds. Part of the reason for this being that they are so thin that they are essentially two-dimensional. If a Nagumwasug wishes to hide, it merely has to turn sideways, and it will become invisible due to its two-dimensional thinness. Those who are rude towards the Nagumwasug are cursed with illness and death, but those who are respectful are blessed with good fortune. While the Ohdoh are said to have originally been humans that went underground and became little spirits during the Ice Age, the Nagumwasug were by contrast said to have always been spirits. While the Ohdoh fought the evil creatures of the earth and underground, the Nagumwasug are said to have fought the evil creatures of the water and sky, though their specific enemies are not enumerated. The Nagumwasug are known to be incredibly kind, at least towards those who are not rude towards them and who do not draw attention to their ugliness. It is said that the Nagumwasug taught mankind how to fish, trap, and raise crops. They live on a diet of acorns, fish, fruit, rabbits, and squirrels. In their protective role, they could be compared to guardian angels or to the spirit rock which was said to protect the Menominee nation. They can also be compared with the Tehotikal luhe of the Oneida nation, who were another type of little people who are known for aiding humans with agriculture. Our 16th group of Wisconsin gnomes are the Wematigunis. The Wematigunis are a type of little people from the folklore of the Munsi, standing as tall as a man's waist. They are capable of becoming invisible. They have incredible strength relative to their size, and they sometimes serve as messengers for the Great Spirit. Like many of the different types of gnome-like creatures, they are portrayed as generally good-natured, if prone to pranks and mischief, including calling out to mislead and confuse hunters trying to find their companions in the wilderness. One notable Munsi story mentions a group of 12 little women who dwelled in the cliffs at the mouth of a river. Whenever any man passed by on the river, the little women would come out and ask the man where he came from, where he was going, and how his crops were growing. If the traveler responded kindly, they let him go with a blessing of good luck. If he was rude or unkind towards them, they would chase him down, catch him, and pluck out all of his body hair. If they were unable to catch him, they'd instead call upon their uncle, a great horned serpent who would draw in the water of the river with a deep breath and would catch the man in his mouth, devouring them. From the hair they plucked from the men they caught, they wove baskets that they used to store fish, and which could seemingly hold a limitless quantity of fish. The little women would ask passing fishermen for offerings of the fish he had caught, and if he generously gave them all his fish, he would later catch so many he wouldn't know what to do with them. If the fishermen refused or complained, they were cursed with bad luck and would catch no more fish for the rest of their days. The Wematigunis can be best compared with the Čanoti, another type of little people who like to use their voices to confuse forest travelers, and which also served as messengers for the spirit world. They can also be compared to the Answerback and the Fleshgate, which also use their voices to deceive forest travelers. Of all the different types of little people who can be appeased with gifts, only the Wematigunis and the Makia'wisag are known to demand their gifts directly and punish those who refuse. The Wematigunis can also be compared with the friendly Port de Mors Windigo, which was a spirit that likewise could bring about good or bad fishing. Our 17th gnome type is that of the Tomte Nisser. The Tomte Nisser are a type of little people from Scandinavia who appeared as small, bearded men with pointed hats and tippet capes. They served as household spirits, washing dishes, sweeping the kitchen, minding the fireplace, and even helping out with barn chores. In exchange, the household's humans would set out a bowl of porridge or other food as an offering to their Tomte Nisser. In the 1930s, it was documented that Scandinavian immigrants in Wisconsin were still observing this practice of leaving out food for the Tomte Nisser. One old farmer was even known to set aside a small fenced plot of wheat and vegetables exclusively for use by his Tomte Nisser. Some Scandinavian folk stories claim that a Tomte Nisser possesses only one eye. While none of the Wisconsin legends on the Tomte Nisser make this claim, this presents an interesting contrast with the Lutin, a French gnome which is said in Wisconsin lore to possess only one eye, but which is said to have two eyes back in mainland France. In modern Scandinavia, the Tomte Nisser have become associated with the winter solstice and Christmas, which interestingly gives them similarities to the Kobolders, creatures from German Wisconsinite folklore, which were explicitly said to be a relative to the Tomte Nisser, and which made toys for children on St. Nicholas Day. Our 18th gnome variety is that of the New Glarus elves. There exist a few folk tales of elves originating from Swedish immigrants in New Glarus. Unlike the elves of Wisconsin's German immigrants, who are magical craftsmen and household spirits, these New Glarus elves are magical woodland spirits, dwelling in the forests and taking the form of beautiful little maidens, ruled over by an elf queen. They possess magical wands, and primarily in legends use their powers to bless or comfort lost and frightened children. Their wands are capable of granting blessings of knowledge, humility, and childish innocence, with these gifts lasting for the entire life of the blessed child. The elves were also related to the Night Flight, a group of angels believed to fly over the earth every night, sighing and lamenting over the sins committed the prior day. Their queen had knowledge of these nocturnal angels, and in legend comforted children who had been frightened by their sighing. The elves can be compared to the Memegwesiwuk of Menominee and Ojibwe folklore, which likewise were a type of little people who dwelled in the wilderness and looked over children. The 19th variety of little people we have to discuss is the house trolls. The house trolls are a legend that originates in Scandinavian folklore, part of a larger family of trolls to which other Scandinavian Wisconsinite legends all belong, such as the mountain trolls, the Coon Valley trolls, the Huldrefolk creatures, and the Pawisa'sûk. All of Wisconsin's troll types were said to have evolved from the maggots that were in the corpse of the giant Ymir, the giant whose body was used to make the world. While both the mountain trolls and Coon Valley trolls are giant-sized, and the Hulders and Pawisa'sûk are the size of a human being, the house trolls are uniquely of a diminutive stature, standing under 2 feet tall. The house trolls were largely humanoid, but with pointed ears, pinkish eyes, the snout of a pig, and 2 tails. When exposed to sunlight, the house troll turns to stone. House trolls are entities that can help around the house and the farm, doing chores and performing jobs and tasks. Unlike similar household little folk, like the Tomte Nisser or the Lutins, the house troll doesn't help out of its own free will, but rather is enslaved by a human owner and forced to do housework. They can also be sent out by their masters to sneak into neighboring homes in order to steal valuables. With their bipedal pig-like appearance and the fact they perform domestic tasks for humans, the house troll has quite a few parallels with the griddle greaser of Wisconsin game warden lore, which was a bipedal pig creature trained to keep flapjack griddles greased. The appearance of the house trolls also gives them similarities to the pig-faced men and the man-faced pigs. They can also be compared with the Makia'wisag, another type of little person who was also known to burglarize houses. The next gnome type is one of my favorites. just because of how enigmatic it is. The Jutal were a type of little people recorded by folklorist Thor Helgason, included on a list of legendary creatures that Norwegian immigrants brought to Wisconsin. However, the description provided for the Jutal was limited to saying that they were dwarves, found on the tops of mountains, where the gigantic mountain trolls or berg trolls could also be found. This makes the Jutal the most enigmatic of Wisconsin's gnome legends. Furthering the mystery of the Jutal is the fact that in the folklore of Norway itself, Jutal or Jotun was a term used for the adversaries of the Aesir, or Norse gods. The Jutal were typically associated with the winter and cold, and a number of them were gigantic in stature, which has led to many translators to refer to the entire race as being ice giants. This seems to imply that somewhere in the process of coming to Wisconsin, that the legend of the Jutal evolved from having a large stature into becoming a mountain dwarf, or perhaps the Jutal legends were combined with other Norwegian dwarf legends, hybridizing the two. The legends of the Old Norse Jotun would also evolve into legends of trolls, with eventually many different types of trolls branching out from this further evolution. This makes the mountain-dwelling Jutal an interesting counterpart to the mountain-dwelling berg troll, as both legends can ultimately be traced to the same mimetic source. However, over the course of human history, the legend branched, and both versions evolved, one becoming a mountain giant, the other becoming a mountain dwarf. Then, in the process of coming to Wisconsin, the two mimetic descendants of the Old Norse Jotun coincidentally became neighbors, coming to share the mountain tops with one another within the lore. You might already have become familiar with this next type of gnome at your local deli, though maybe you didn't even realize it. Germany features many folk stories of helpful elves or gnomes that aid hard-working craftsmen by night. The most famous of these tales is The Elves and the Shoemaker, where by night, helpful little folk would aid the efforts of a shoemaker, laboring in his workshop. This tale can be found repeated in Wisconsin folklore, having followed German immigrants into Wisconsin. While these German elves would help craftsmen by night, they also wanted to remain unseen. If someone schemed to see them, they would feel disrespected and would never help the craftsman ever again. Within the context of Wisconsin folklore, it seems these elves began concentrating their efforts on aiding sausage makers in specific. The man who can be most credited with keeping these legends alive in Wisconsin would appear to be Fred Usinger, who viewed the elf as an important feature of German folklore and felt it was important to include these myths within his sausage company. He claimed that the elves helped to run his sausage factory by night, and in 1906, he commissioned a mural in their honor, depicting the elves hard at work. These elves appear as tiny, portly humans with long white beards and pointed red hats. Eventually, the head elf depicted in the mural, Fritzy, would be adopted as the mascot of Usinger's sausage-making company. To this day, the owners of Usinger's publicly insist that the elves are very much real and are hard at work every night making America's finest sausage. The elves have obvious similarities to the Lutins, Tomte, Nisser, and house trolls, which likewise help humans with various tasks. However, the elves are far more specialized, helping out with a specific craft or trade rather than simply aiding in chores. They are most similar to the Kobolders, another type of tiny German craftsman which did not like to be seen, albeit one that exclusively makes toys for St. Nicholas's Day. Speaking of the Kobolders are a type of little people found in the folklore of some German Wisconsinite communities, notably in Sheboygan County. They served as toy makers and assistants of St. Nicholas, much like the modern notion of Santa's elves. However, unlike Santa's elves, who make their toys at the North Pole, St. Nicholas's Kobolders would make their toys on site. In the weeks leading up to St. Nicholas's Day, they would take over the attic of a home and construct all of the toys for that household inside of that attic. The Kobolders wore brown jackets, pointed cloth shoes, and a type of pointed, tasseled, knit brown cap called a zipfelkappen. They had long beards, either white or gray in color. During the nights, the Kobolders would take a break from toy making and would typically entertain themselves using bowling competitions. The noise from the attic bowling heard by the children sleeping, or rather attempting to sleep, below. To gain the favor of the Kobolders, children would make offerings of cookies, left on the stairs leading up to the attic. The Kobolders, above all else, did not permit anyone to look upon them, becoming very angry if any curious child dared to peek in on them. No child wished to offend them and risk being deprived of toys on St. Nicholas Day by an angry Kobolder, and so few dared enter the attic in the weeks leading up to the holiday. In this way, they bear similarity to the other variety of German craftsman elves, which also did not like humans looking upon them. Wisconsin folk stories explicitly claimed that these Kobolders were the relatives of a group of dwarves that served a fabled goblin from New York folklore who dwelled near the Hudson River. They were also related to another group of dwarves which had bowled with Rip Van Winkle in the Catskill Mountains, also in New York. Furthermore, folk stories proposed that they might also be relatives of the Tomte Nisser, from the folklore of Wisconsin's Scandinavian immigrants. In the modern era, the Tomte Nisser have even become associated with Christmas, strengthening that connection. The next type of gnome is my personal favorite, just because of how much effort one needs to go to actually find this obscure legend. Wisconsin folklorists recorded a type of gnome or mining spirit found within the folklore of Czechoslovakian immigrants. These gnomes were between 2 and 3 feet tall, and they wore pointed red hats, blue trousers, white coats, and high boots. They dwelled within caves and mountainous woodlands, smoked long pipes, and used toadstools as one would a regular stool. The gnomes served as protectors of the treasures of both the mountains and the forests. The gnomes did not like loud noises, especially whistling, and if someone whistled while in the forest, the gnomes would never reveal their treasures to them. However, for one who was respectfully silent and reverent of the wilderness, the gnomes were said to be very generous. They might cause the mountains to open up, revealing their wealth of gold, gemstones, and valuable minerals, or guide the wanderer to the treasures of the forest. The treasures of the forest that they guarded were primarily strawberries and mushrooms. The gnomes permitted a person to fill an entire jug with either berry or fungus, but before a person picked a single one for themselves, the person was first required to pick and throw away an offering for the gnomes. They were then required to pick and throw away another for the nymphs, then another for the snakes, another for the frogs, another for the rabbits, another for their patron saint, and finally one for their priest, before picking any for themselves. A strawberry picker was required to throw away a whole strawberry for each offering, but a mushroom picker could throw away a piece of mushroom for each offering, as the mushrooms were much larger. In their role as a guardian and revealer of mineral riches, they can be compared to the Tommyknockers, the Mizauwabeekummoowuk, underwater panthers, and iron and copper spirits, which serve similar roles. They can also be compared to the Washington Island Huldrefolk, which likewise request a portion of a berry picker's harvest. Speaking of the Huldrefolk originated within Icelandic folklore and followed Icelandic immigrants to Washington Island, where Icelandic culture is the strongest within Wisconsin. The Washington Island Huldrefolk take the form of tiny humans wearing tiny, old-fashioned clothing and odd hats. They dwell in the hidden places of Washington Island and will teach children their haunting songs and secret dances in exchange for offerings of berries. This gives them a parallel with the Czechoslovakian gnomes, who likewise could be appeased with berry offerings. The term Huldrefolk means hidden folk and has been applied to several different creatures found in Wisconsin folklore. These include the Blaumaner, the Hulder creatures, and Hosgard's Raya. However, the Washington Island Huldrefolk are the only Huldrefolk who are of a gnomish stature, the rest all being at least the same size as humans. Our 25th group of gnomes are known as the Armouchiquois. The Armouchiquois are a group of little people of uncertain origin. They allegedly originate in Native American legends, but the specific tribe they supposedly come from is unrecorded. They then entered into the folklore of American settlers, who in turn brought the legend to Wisconsin and the Great Lakes region as a whole. Their name might give a slight hint as to their potential origin. The word Armouchiquois was originally a French rendition of a name given by the Abenaki to a tribe that lived on the coast of Maine, just south of the Saco River, a tribal group that no longer exists. Perhaps this legend then originated from either the Abenaki or from this Armouchiquois tribe. The Armouchiquois of folklore were said to have stubby, squat bodies. They possessed thin, long, almost skeletal limbs and heads that appeared shrunken. They are said to weigh about 60 pounds and stand at about 3 feet tall, but most of their height is due to their extremely long legs. In fact, their legs are so long that, when sitting, an Armouchiquois' knees rest about 6 inches above its head. These long legs are also incredibly powerful, allowing the Armouchiquois to run at extreme speeds, jump great distances, and perform skillful acrobatics. Their squat bodies and long legs give them an almost frog-like appearance when they are jumping. The Armouchiquois are said to have a relatively small population, dwelling exclusively in the Great Lakes region. They are stealthy and prefer to live on the outskirts of farmlands, always living in the proximity of a river, swamp, or body of water. They are embittered over losing lands to human expansion and are quick to anger as a result. They become enraged whenever their homes are disturbed by humans, but are especially furious when exposed to pollution, landfills, or chemical spills. Angered Armouchiquois will curse humans in retribution, causing broken windows and mechanical failures, as well as spreading disease to crops and livestock. In extreme cases, an Armouchiquois will even resort to stealing children or pets. The Armouchiquois have notable similarities with the St. Croix River Little People, who likewise are a type of little people who live near the water and curse polluters specifically. They also bear some similarities with the leprechaun, which also dwells in swamplands, can jump great distances, and terrorizes humans that encroach on its territory. They can further be compared with the drone-hunting duende, which specifically targets human technology for destruction. The next category of Wisconsin gnome legends we will discuss are the gnomes that can also be classed as fearsome critters, a term for a wide variety of fantastical creatures from the legends and stories of Wisconsinite lumberjacks, game wardens, railway workers, and other professions that required men to live together in camps for extended periods of time. Most fearsome critters are bestial in nature, and many others are just plain weird. Gnome-like fearsome critters are relatively rare, compared to their more animalistic counterparts, with only 3 such gnomes found within the treasury of Wisconsin timber lore. 2 of these specifically come from the records of Art Childs, a Wisconsinite game warden who created an entire bestiary of fearsome critter lore. But before we fully enter the category of fearsome gnomes, we have one final entry in the immigrant category to cover, which will lead us into this next category. It was Irish immigrants who brought legends of leprechauns to the state of Wisconsin. They were depicted in Wisconsin legends as little bearded men wearing shabby green clothing, sometimes with top hats or pointed caps. Commonly, their shabby appearance is likened to that of a hobo. According to the leprechaun stories of Wisconsin folklore, leprechauns are prone to mischief, enjoy dancing, and sometimes are invisible to all except children. The Irish were one of many ethnic groups that participated in Wisconsin's lumber boom, and Irish lumberjacks brought the leprechaun into the folk tales of the lumberjack tradition. It was in the lumber camps that the leprechaun legend would undergo a stark transformation, evolving quite a bit from their original source legends. Their name was also given a change in spelling, and thereafter to the lumbermen they were known as the leprechauns. The leprechaun was said to be a species of primate, originally native to Ireland, that came to North America on the same ships that brought in Irish immigrants. It had come to dwell in the wilderness of North America, preferring bogs and swamplands to make its home. These leprechauns were hairy, with clawed hands and feet and sharp teeth. the leprechaun was thought to have strong legs and was capable of leaping great distances. In its natural environment, the leprechaun used this ability to deftly leap over the watery areas of its swampy domain. The leprechaun was also of a mischievous and somewhat malevolent nature, however, and it was said to have the habit of leaping out at lumberjacks with slashing claws and gnashing teeth, terrorizing and chasing the poor lumberman for its own amusement. According to the lumber lore, the leprechaun bore the scientific name Simiadiabolus hibernicus horribilis. The leprechauns can perhaps be best compared to the Armouchiquois, another type of little people who are skilled at jumping, who live near the water, and who like to terrorize humans who intrude on their territory. The leprechaun can also be compared to the agro-pelter, another primate fearsome critter that terrorized the lumbermen. With the fact that the leprechaun is described as very hairy, and the fact that the more traditional leprechaun can be invisible to all except children, they can further be compared to the Memegwesiwuk, the little people of the Menominee and Ojibwe, who were both hairy and invisible to all except for children and medicine men. The second fearsome gnome we have to discuss is the will-o'-the-wisp. The will-o'-the-wisp was a fearsome critter which was used to explain the phenomenon of ghost lights. The fearsome critter version of the will-o'-the-wisps described them as tiny gnomes that carried blue lanterns with them. They traveled through the marshy land at night, making sure all of the small birds and animals were tucked safely into their beds. The will-o'-the-wisps were said to enjoy discussions of philosophy, but have odd and unusual beliefs on philosophical topics, such as the view that death is merely a primitive superstition. The self-proclaimed naturalists among the lumberjacks assigned the scientific name of ignis fatuus to the will-o'-the-wisp. The will-o'-the-wisp is not the only creature that arose in Wisconsin folklore to explain the phenomenon of ghost lights, as they have also been attributed to bearwalkers, the Kaisergeist, ghosts, angels, and even to the flames of the Elk Mound dragon. Ghost lights have also been reported in the vicinity of the Devil's Punch Bowl, where another type of gnome is said to dwell. The final fearsome critter gnome is known as the humpdumple. The humpdumple is another type of gnome found among the fearsome critters that arose from lumberjack stories. The humpdumple is described as a funny-looking dwarf covered in warts like a potato, with a big nose, a single eye, and lumpy feet as heavy as paving stones. The humpdumple is intelligent, but rather mean-spirited and prone to mischief. Due to his single eye, his eyesight is notably rather poor. With both poor eyesight and heavy feet, he tends to stumble around as he walks. Due to this stumbling gait and his heavy feet, he creates holes and ruts on the roads and trails through the forest. He enjoys nothing more in life than to ruin roads, and so as soon as a new road or trail is laid down, the humpdumple will set out to destroy it. The humpdumple only comes out during the night, and only when he's sure no one else is around to catch him at his mischief. The humpdumple can be compared with the lutin, a type of French Wisconsinite gnome, which is also said to only have one eye. The humpdumple's love of ruining roads also gives him some parallels with the lacrosse goblins, which mischievously cause road obstructions. The final category of gnome legends we will discuss covers the gnomes that are not indigenous to the state, were not brought by immigrants, and were not related to lumberjack legends. Rather, these 13 different gnome types seem to have organically arisen in Wisconsin over the course of history. The first of these we will discuss is closely related to the immigrant gnomes we previously covered. The St. Croix River Little People are a legend with roots in the immigrant stories of gnomes within the state. They are explicitly a type of metis gnome, said to be descended from the Irish leprechauns and the Ojibwe Manitoussiwuk, with a bit of German elf mixed in for good measure. These types of little people are said to have come to Wisconsin following their human cultural counterparts, and then intermarried with one another along the banks of the St. Croix River, giving rise to the modern community of magical little people who call the river their home today. The legend does not specify which type of Ojibwe Manitoussiwuk, the St. Croix little people, are descended from, but the most likely candidates would be the Memegwesiwuk, who are associated with rivers and which have notable similarities to the leprechauns. The St. Croix River little people are only visible to children, a trait they share with both their leprechaun and Memegwesi forebears. Appearance-wise, the little people have a mix of Irish and Ojibwe features, with long, dark or auburn hair, high cheekbones, and freckles. Their clothing is likewise an equal blend between the two cultures. They dwell next to the St. Croix River and are extremely protective of it. Humans who respect their river are in kind blessed by the little people, but those who pollute it are cursed. Their curse upon polluters is rather karmic. The little people will secretly follow a polluter home and place a curse upon their household. The cursed polluter's sinks and showers will begin dispensing raw sewage in place of water, and their toilets will fill with blood, effectively polluting the household waters of the offending human. In this way, the St. Croix River little people are similar to the Armouchiquois, another type of little people who curse polluters. They can also be compared to the Blaumaner, the Rougarous, and the Redhorn battle ghosts, all three being Wisconsinite legends that combined elements from the different cultures within the state. The next gnome legend is actually the first gnome legend I stumbled across after starting to research Wisconsin's folklore. The most well-known modern gnomes within Wisconsin folklore are the gnomes of Fifield, who are said to dwell in the woods near the haunted Holy Cross Road. These gnomes appear much like the stereotypical garden gnome, with pointed ears, long white beards, and pointy red hats. They are one of the largest types of gnome in Wisconsin, sometimes described as being between 3 and 4 feet tall. Even when the gnomes are not seen outright, people in the area report feelings of being watched and witness a rustling in the leaves that appears to follow them as they move. The gnomes of Fifield can be provoked by throwing a rock into their forest. This will cause the gnomes to either curse the thrower with misfortune or, more commonly, throw the rock right back. The Fifield gnomes, like many of the different gnomes of Wisconsin, can also be befriended through offerings, with Fifield gnomes especially preferring offerings of shiny rocks and candy. While the Fifield gnomes are not explicitly said to be a cross between European and Native American little people, they seem to share mimetic DNA with both kinds of little people. Their appearance clearly derives from European gnomes, and they have certain behaviors, like rock throwing, living in trees, and accepting offerings of food, that are commonly found in various Native American little people legends. The Fifield gnomes can also be compared to other modern gnome legends. Their appearance is described almost identically to the gnomes of the Devil's Punch Bowl, and their rock-throwing behavior gives them strong parallels to the drone-hunting duende. They might also be compared to the agro-pelter, a tree-dwelling primate that threw branches and logs at trespassing lumberjacks. The 32nd gnome legend is that of the town of Haunchieville. The Haunchies are a group of dwarves believed to live in Haunchieville, a settlement near Mystic Road in Muskego. Haunchieville is believed to be located either in the ruined buildings at the end of Mystic Road or in a network of underground tunnels located below the area. Classifying the Haunchies as legendary creatures is likely a bit contentious, owing to the fact that, within the modern Haunchieville lore, the Haunchies are in fact human. Modern Haunchieville stories claim that the Haunchies were originally circus dwarves who murdered their abusive ringmaster, dismembering his corpse and hanging the remains from trees. After the grisly murder, they disappeared into the woods near Muskego to form their own insular community. Interestingly, though, the earliest versions of the Haunchieville mythos seem to view them not as humans with dwarfism, but instead more akin to mythological dwarves or even goblins, as they are sometimes described. So while the modern incarnation of the legend paints them as legendary humans rather than legendary creatures, historically speaking, the Haunchies appear to have once been viewed as a more fantastical little people. The Haunchies are most known for their violent xenophobia towards outsiders. Tall folk, as in those taller than them, found intruding on Haunchie territory, are said to be met by Haunchies wielding bats, saws, thrown rocks, and shotguns. The Haunchies will saw the legs off any tall people found within their territory in order to cut them down to size before expelling them again. However, sometimes the Haunchies are said to merely kill their intruders. One legend states that a local farmer who accidentally dug up one of the tunnels connecting to subterranean Haunchieville was later found hanging from the rafters of his barn with "The Haunchies made me do it" scrawled on the walls nearby. Haunchieville lore claims the settlement has a single, regular-sized inhabitant, a shotgun-wielding albino human who wards people away from Haunchieville. The albino is said to have found Haunchieville as a child and won acceptance by the Haunchies for being the only one who showed kindness to the dwarves, being adopted and raised by the Haunchies thereafter. The tale of the albino also seems to harken back to the many European stories of human children who are abducted and raised by the little folk of the wilderness. The albino of Haunchieville can also be compared to the Bye-Bye Man, another murderous albino from Wisconsin legend. The next group of gnomes we have to discuss are what I call the drone-hunting duende. The legend of the drone-hunting duende comes from an account posted online in 2014. The witnesses reported that they were flying a drone over a private, fenced-in property in Wisconsin when their drone was suddenly knocked out of the air by a thrown rock, crashing to the earth below. The drone operators traveled to the location where the drone had gone down, but all that remained of it was a single propeller. They were then surrounded by strange chanting and had stones thrown at them by creatures that they said looked like dwarves or duende. The term duende was originally the name of a specific type of legendary little people from the folklore of Iberia and Latin America, but the word has, on the modern internet, evolved into a catch-all term for all types of little people. The drone pilots were driven away by these rock-throwing duende and never recovered the captured drone. These duende, as described, have obvious parallels to the rock-throwing gnomes of Fifield, as well as the modern legends of the duende. Their dislike of human trespassers and their ability to destroy human machinery further gives them parallels to the Armouchiquois little people. They might also be likened to the tree-dwelling, branch-throwing, highly territorial agro-pelter from lumberjack folklore. Our 34th group of gnomes are the Punch Bowl gnomes. The gnomes of the Devil's Punch Bowl State Natural Area near Menominee are less known than the Fifield variety, and yet are described nearly identically in appearance. Like their Fifield cousins, they are said to have pointed ears, long white beards, pointy red hats, and are even described as being the same height, between 3 to 4 feet tall. These gnomes seem somewhat more isolationist than their Fifield cousins, typically avoiding contact with humans rather than chucking stones at them. They may have the ability to turn invisible, or otherwise are simply good at hiding, as many of the stories surrounding the Punch Bowl gnomes include them suddenly disappearing shortly after being spotted. Like the Fifield gnomes, they can be appeased with offerings of shiny rocks or candy, which can guarantee safe passage through the punch bowl. They have occasionally been seen smoking tobacco from pipes, which gives them a parallel to both the gnome legends of Czechoslovakian immigrant communities and the various types of Native American little people, all of which use tobacco. Atmospheric ghost lights have also been reported within the Devil's Punch Bowl, which gives these gnomes a parallel with the Will-o'-the-Wisp, a type of gnome from lumberjack folklore that was said to be the cause of ghost lights. Our 35th type of gnome is that of the Trooping Fairy. The Trooping Fairies of Barron County, also called Barron County Trolls or Little Men, are a type of little people which were spotted on the side of Highway 25 in Barron County in 1919. The Trooping Fairies are described as tiny, ugly, hairless men with nearly albino skin, wearing nothing but patchwork leather overalls. They were witnessed traveling along the side of the road, quietly conversing with one another before suddenly breaking into military song, and then quieting back down to whispers. Their song implies that they were involved in some sort of war, which they thought would last until near the end of the 20th century. The words of the song they sang were reported as, "We won't stop fighting till the end of the war. in 1994. Sound off. 1, 2. Sound off. 3, 4. Detail. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. After the one sighting of the trooping fairies in 1919, they were never again spotted. Thus it is unknown whether or not their war, whatever it was they were fighting against, truly ended in 1994. Their patchwork clothing and shabby appearance gives them some parallels with the drone-hunting duende, the leprechauns, and the duende. Many types of Native American little people were engaged in supernatural warfare, and so could perhaps also be linked with the trooping fairies and their own mysterious war. The next gnome on our list is known as the duende. With the rise of the internet, Wisconsin's little people legends have branched out online, with many hikers in Wisconsin reporting encounters with little men known as the duende. The name duende likely derives from the word duende, which was initially the name of a specific group of little people from Iberian folklore, which has evolved online to become a general catch-all term for little people legends worldwide. These modern duende sightings describe them as standing between 2 and 4 feet tall, with long ears and noses, typically wearing earth tone, hand-stitched clothing, and using only the most rudimentary of tools. They are able to stealthily disappear between the trees, and sometimes only their high-pitched laughter and chattering noises can be heard from the surrounding woods. Their small footprints are sometimes observed and reported in a manner similar to the large footprints found and attributed to Bigfoot. The duende are commonly observed engaging in ritualistic behaviors. One encounter in 1998, reported near Eagle River, sighted duende darting between the trees near a circle of oddly shaped stones, apparently constructed by the little men. Another encounter in Kettle Moraine, 2004, witnessed the duende holding sticks and dancing around a miniature campfire near the shore of a river. Both in appearance and name, the duende can be easily compared to the drone-hunting duende. Their shabby clothing also gives them parallels with the trooping fairies and the leprechauns. Their habit of darting in and out of the foliage is similar to the behavior of the weary road imps. The fact they sometimes hide in the trees and only their voices can be heard give them further parallels with both the Čanoti and Wematigunis. The Eagle River duende were also spotted in around the same area as Joe Simonton reported an encounter with little men who were piloting a UFO. To delve into the next gnome type, we will briefly need to go over the Burlington Vortex. The Burlington Vortex is a supposed whirlpool of psychic or electromagnetic energy located in the area of the city of Burlington, which in part serves as a portal between different dimensions. Many different sightings of supernatural entities or phenomena are attributed to the vortex, including sightings of little people, which are generally referred to as elves by the paranormal researchers who study the vortex. These elves are usually cloaked and thus rendered invisible to the human eye. However, images of the elves, as well as the other psychic phenomena that they cause, can be captured through multidimensional photography, as the presence of a cloaked elf has strange effects upon photos taken in the area of the little person. The elves of the vortex are a reclusive folk, preferring to stick to the deep woods and go about their own private affairs. When captured by multi-dimensional photography, they are typically found watching humans from the tops of trees. The elves are also associated with another type of phenomena in the Burlington area, known as elfin currents. According to Burlington paranormal researcher Mary Sutherland, elfin currents result from our thoughts making contact with thoughts coming from another dimension, which causes energy or light to become intensified, and which can be captured on cameras in what looks like waves of light or bolts of lightning. These elven currents create a subspace between dimensions, allowing for the exchange of information between universes. The fact that the vortex elves can be observed in treetops and can transmit information through thoughts gives them strong parallels to the Čanoti, another tree-dwelling little folk who can send messages through dreams. Our 38th group of gnomes are known as the Mumps Fairies. The Mumps Fairies were a type of little people, about 8 inches in height, who were reportedly seen in Milwaukee in 1978 by a 13-year-old girl who was suffering from the mumps. The girl saw two of these fairies standing on the sill of a window, pointing and soundlessly laughing at her. They appeared to have greenish skin and green clothing, with the color of their faces and mouths being a lighter hue than the color of their clothing. They wore pointed hats and seemed to be wearing suits that had attached shoes. Their limbs were long and slender, their eyes were big and totally black, and their noses were tiny. Their wide-open, laughing mouths also appeared to be pitch black and toothless. These mumps fairies seem most comparable to the leprechaun, which in Wisconsin lore lives in people's homes and sometimes is visible only to children. There have also been a few other sightings of green humanoids within the state, albeit ones that are much larger than the tiny mumps fairies. They can also be loosely compared to the Noctule and the Mouston Birdman, which are both eerie entities that are known for watching children from the window. Our next topic is Gnome royalty, with an entity simply known as the Gnome King. The Gnome King is a legend originating in Winnebago County. The king takes the form of a pitch-black, shadowy, hunched gnome with a tall, pointy black hat and two piercing red eyes. Like many types of gnomes, he appears to have the ability to either become invisible or otherwise vanish into thin air. Despite a frightening appearance, the Gnome King serves a fairly benevolent role, acting as a guardian of forgotten treasures. He especially watches over the things that people can't bear to part with, yet cannot bear to see or touch, such as cherished possessions that once belonged to a departed loved one. The Gnome King can be found wherever cherished but forgotten treasures can be found, lurking in shadowy barns, garages, attics, basements, storage units, and old, decaying buildings. The Gnome King is said to also be the guardian of the threshold between life and death, which he embodies through protecting and preserving the loved but forgotten. His association with barns and attics give him parallels with both the stable-dwelling Lutins and the attic-dwelling Kobolders, two other types of little people from similar environments. The Gnome King also has a notable similarity to the Shadow People, especially the entity known as the Hat Man, though the Gnome King, of course, stands much shorter. His shadowy body and red eyes, along with him guarding the threshold between life and death, also gives him strong parallels to the Black Shuck, a red-eyed black canine, which likewise was said to guard the boundaries between life and death. With our 40th gnome legend, we are entering into the bizarre topic of alien gnomes, beginning with the Wauwatosa Night Visitors. The Wauwatosa Night Visitors were a group of 5 oversized gnomes who were seen late at night in Wauwatosa on the night of November 10th, 1975. They were not the only strange occurrence on that night. At least 15 different instances of UFO phenomenon were reported across North America on that date. One of these UFO sightings was even in Wauwatosa itself, but was independent of the gnome sighting. For this reason, the Wauwatosa Night Visitors are often associated with UFOs and are typically classed as extraterrestrials by ufologists. In a strange synchronicity, this night of UFO and gnome sightings was also the night that the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank in the waters of Lake Superior. On the night of November 10th, at 7:10 p.m., the SS Edmund Fitzgerald radioed her final message. "We are holding our own, going along like an old shoe," and afterwards was never heard from again. 40 minutes later, in Wauwatosa, a husband and wife reported that at the precise moment their clock struck 7:50 p.m., they heard a knock upon their door. Answering the door, they were confronted by what they said looked like an oversized gnome, wearing long dark clothing and an old straw hat. Patches of unkempt hair poked out from under the hat, and his skin was dark brown, with deep grooves, the color and texture of smoked meat. His mouth was puckered and extremely small, roughly the size of a dime, sitting above a pointed chin. His legs appeared bent slightly backwards and bowed out. His hands were twisted claws, the left claw holding a strange white staff, described as some kind of energy stick by the husband. The night visitor did not talk, possibly unable to do so on account of its small mouth size. The couple later speculated that perhaps these creatures had some alternate means of communication. After the husband attempted to question the night visitor, the creature simply tapped his staff on the ground, which caused the creature to levitate a few inches into the air. The night visitor then slowly hovered backwards into the street, where 4 other oversized gnomes were seen, each dressed the same way, and each carrying a white staff in their left claw. The gnome that had knocked on their door then held up its right claw, gesturing towards the couple, before the night visitors all tapped their staves against the ground, levitating and hovering down the street and disappearing into the distance. One of the night visitors was notably fatter than the other ones. This roly-poly visitor was said to be playing with his staff like a child with a new toy. The fat gnome would strike his staff against the ground and launch himself into the air like an astronaut on the moon, vaulting several feet into the air in large, low-gravity jumps, instead of merely hovering a few inches off the ground like his compatriots. The night visitors seemed to have a strange effect on the couple's memory. While they could remember some details of the oversized gnome's appearances, other details were obscure and foggy. Most notably, neither husband or wife could remember what the creature's eyes looked like. The couple speculated that there was more to their encounter than the creature simply knocking on their door, only to then levitate away when they answered. They suspected the other details of their encounter had been somehow erased from their memories. The husband and wife who witnessed the night visitors reported their encounter to police, who unsurprisingly did not take the report very seriously. They were not the only people in Wauwatosa to report a strange encounter that night, of course. 2 other Wauwatosa men reported seeing multiple UFOs in the sky, reporting strange hovering objects that were having a strange effect on gravity in the area. This possibly suggests a connection between the gravity-manipulating UFOs and the gravity-manipulating staves used by the night visitors in the same city on the same night. The Wauwatosa night visitors are not the only entities in Wisconsin to be associated with both UFOs and gnomes. Both the Eagle River aliens as well as the Antigo alien are described as little men who piloted UFOs. The Eagle River aliens have also been linked to the mythical Fions, gnome-like creatures from Breton folklore, by a prominent ufologist. The night visitors might also be compared to one of the aliens reportedly seen in Wisconsin by author Whitley Strieber. While this yellow-brown wrinkled alien doesn't seem to have much in common with the night visitors, she reportedly had some kind of high-tech copper wand, which bears some similarity to the visitors' high-tech white staves. Moving on to our last 2 alien gnomes, we come to the story of Joe Simonton and what is perhaps the wildest UFO encounter in all of Wisconsin folklore. On the 18th of April, 1961, a man named Joe Simonton of Eagle River reported an encounter with a UFO, which is undoubtedly the strangest UFO encounter reported in Wisconsin history. Simonton said that he heard a loud screeching noise outside of his house and exited his home to find a flying saucer hovering above his driveway. It was about 30 feet in diameter and 12 feet tall, and was made of a metallic material that was brighter than chrome. A hatch on the craft opened, and Simonton could see 3 of the craft's inhabitants inside. They appeared as clean-shaven, short Italian men. One was wearing a 2-piece suit, and the others wore turtlenecks. All 3 wore tightly fitting knit caps. One of the short men exited the craft with a pitcher made of the same brighter-than-chrome material as the outside of the saucer. Through miming and body language, the small man asked Simonton to fill his pitcher with water. Simonton obliged, and when he brought the pitcher of water back to the saucer, he could see inside of the craft, which appeared dark, like wrought iron. He also could see one of the small men cooking small pancakes on a griddle. Through miming and body language, Simonton showed interest in the pancakes, and so the little men gave him 3 of the pancakes in exchange for the water. The hatch on the saucer then closed, and the UFO took off flying south. Simonton ate one of the pancakes and said it tasted awful like cardboard, and remarked, "If that's what they lived on, no wonder they're small." He then contacted the police with his story, who in turn contacted the Air Force, and soon Joseph Allen Hynek and Major Robert J. Friend of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's project to investigate UFO sightings, went out to interview Simonton. The Air Force found Simonton to be a credible witness, stating that they believed that he was being honest and truly believed the encounter had happened. They also sent off the 2 remaining pancakes to be tested by the Food and Drug Laboratory of the Department of Health, which found that they were simply 2 pancakes of terrestrial origin. The only qualities of the pancakes that could even be said to be unusual were that they were made with buckwheat, which was uncommon in the US at the time, and that they were made without salt. The pancakes being of terrestrial origin does not necessarily discredit Simonton's story, as he himself points out that he never once said or implied that he believed the UFO was of extraterrestrial origin. Instead, Simonton proposes a human origin for the craft, theorizing that it was some secretly developed but human-made aircraft. Later on, this story was picked up by Dr. Jacques Vallée, a computer scientist and well-known ufologist. Vallée had begun comparing and contrasting stories from European folklore against the findings of Project Blue Book, and it is through his theories that the story of Joe Simonton's pancake aliens becomes linked to gnome legends. The story of the UFO and its short pancake-dispensing inhabitants caught Vallée's interest, as he found within Breton mythology legends of Fions, which were small gnome or fairy-like men, often compared to the French lutin. These Fions would sometimes gift humans with buckwheat pancakes in exchange for some service. In one of the cited stories, a cow owned by a group of cave-dwelling Fions tramples a woman's buckwheat field. As restitution, the Fions offered her an unlimited, lifetime supply of buckwheat pancakes, so long as she swore never to reveal the magical origin of her pancake supply. Additionally, within many fairy legends common to Europe, it is said that fairies detest salt and will not eat it or cook with it. Thus, Vallée found a precedent for small men gifting saltless buckwheat pancakes, pre-existent in European folklore. Through this and other stories, Vallée would build his theory of ultra-terrestrials. Vallée suggested that UFOs were not from another planet, but were in fact made by Earthlings, albeit Earthlings who are hidden and which we remain unaware of, hence the name ultra-terrestrial. According to the ultra-terrestrial theory, all UFO sightings, as well as stories of fairies and gnomes, all trace back to and can be explained by ultra-terrestrials. Vallée also suggests that the absurdity of the Eagle River pancake encounter, as well as the absurdity of many traditional fairy stories, is by design. When the ultra-terrestrials need to make contact with a human, they will, he suggests, do something purposefully absurd. This is meant to make the human witness reluctant to go public with their story, fearing public ridicule. Should the human decide to go public, despite the absurdity of their encounter, no one will believe the absurd tale anyways. So ultimately, thanks to Vallée's research and theory, this particular UFO encounter is inherently linked with gnomes, with the ultra-terrestrial theory suggesting that not only are gnomes real, but that they are the ones piloting the UFOs seen all over Earth. These little men and their flying saucer are not the only Wisconsin UFO legend to be linked with gnomes, as the Wauwatosa night visitors, who were described as oversized gnomes, were seen in Wauwatosa on the same night as many UFO sightings. This encounter is not the only encounter with little people in the area of Eagle River either, with a Duende encounter also reported in the area in 1998. A similar encounter to Simonton's occurred in a restaurant in Antigo, Wisconsin, on a Saturday night, November 17, 1974. Prior to this encounter, there were multiple reports of UFO sightings in the Antigo area. The proprietress of the restaurant, while on duty manning the bar, saw a strange-looking little man enter the establishment with a bouncing gait. This Antigo alien was of a similar height to the little men that Joe Simonton had seen, and had the same dark complexion. He furthermore had shiny, dark black hair, a loosely woven burlap-like jacket, and dark glasses with thick frames. The Antigo alien, unlike the men that Joe Simonton had seen, was not silent but rather spoke in a rapid-paced English that was hard to follow. He motioned to the proprietress and said, "You saw a bright light on Friday night," to which the proprietress tried to correct him, saying she had actually seen a bright light in the sky on the previous Saturday night, rather than Friday. The little man was insistent, however, and repeated, "You saw a bright light on Friday night," 4 more times, smiling throughout the whole encounter. He then began rapidly chattering, saying that a meteor had landed nearby and mentioning something about the town of Medfort, about 100 miles away. The proprietress was unable to follow what the man was saying, and eventually, the strange little man threw his arms into the air and exclaimed, "And the whole world lit up," before suddenly exiting the establishment. The proprietress followed the strange man outside, but discovered that he had vanished completely, with no one having heard a vehicle driving away. The Antigo alien not only strongly resembled Joe Simonton's Little Men in appearance, but also appears to fit the motif of encounters with the Men in Black. The Men in Black are a strange phenomenon reported by those who have witnessed UFOs. They typically appear as humans, though often short and sometimes appearing slightly abnormal, typically reported as wearing black clothing and sunglasses. A man in black encounter will typically occur within a few days or weeks after the UFO sighting. They will attempt to talk to the witness about the UFO sighting, but their speech will often be nonsensical and impossible to follow, details that are shared with the Antigo alien encounter. And finishing off the Antigo alien as our 42nd gnome type. This concludes our comprehensive examination of every single gnome legend found within the great state of Wisconsin. If you've watched this far, I can only presume you really like gnomes, really like Wisconsin, really like folklore, or some combination of the three. And so if any of this has sparked your interests in Wisconsin folklore, or if you wish to learn more about any of the other legendary Wisconsinite creatures that I only briefly mentioned here, consider following There Be Hodags on X, which will post updates about my book and will link to it once that book is completed. Currently, the first draft of the book has been fully completed. About 25% of the revisions to the first draft are completed, and about 50% of the illustrations have been completed as well. Alternatively, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, which will certainly provide an update when the book is available for purchase, and will occasionally post whatever other videos I decide to make on Wisconsin's history and folklore. I really want to make something on Wisconsin's founding father one day, specifically since so few people know we even have one, not to mention the wealth of other historical and folkloric subjects there are to talk about regarding Wisconsin. And as I mentioned in the beginning, if you are interested in my sources behind Wisconsin gnome lore, or wish to read other accounts of these various gnomes, feel free to check out my website, where I have all the sources meticulously listed, and links to the sources of these legends freely available. And thank you all for watching my ridiculous gnome video.